So I've been wanting to level up my hairstyle game for a while now, and I've been on the hunt for some cute hair accessories, but I can't afford a £45 scrunchie. So today I'm going to show you how to make not one, not two, but 4 different scrunchie designs on the cheap. I know, I spoil you. For the fabrics, you can really use whatever you like. I recommend using a mid to lightweight fabric like a nice cotton, or you can even use something a bit more drapey and flowy like a viscose, a rayon, or even a silk if you're feeling really bougie, and they'll be a lot better for your hair because they're a lot slipperier. This is also a great project to use up random bits of scrap fabric you have lying around, and you can even be a little thrifty queen and use fabric from like an old t-shirt, an old pillowcase. So really just get creative and use what you have. First up, we're going to start with the simplest design, the jumbo scrunchie, which, as the name suggests, is basically a normal scrunchie but bigger. And bigger's always better, am I right, ladies? Anyway, so you're going to want to cut one strip of fabric that's 100 centimeters or 39 inches by 20 centimeters or 8 inches in your desired fabric. Fold this strip in half so the right sides are kissing, and then sew down this edge using a straight stitch. When sewing, make sure you back tack at the start and end of all your seams so your stitches don't come undone. And you can always hand sew this seam if you don't have a sewing machine. It just might take you a bit longer, but if you sew while you're watching TV or binge watching all my videos, I'm sure the time will just fly by. Now get a safety pin and pin it to one end of the tube, then turn the tube right sides out like this. Then cut a piece of elastic that's 18 centimeters or 7 inches long and attach one end of the elastic to a safety pin and insert it into the scrunchie. This is super easy, but it can take a minute, so just be patient. And I find pinning the other end of the elastic down helps, as sometimes it wants to ping into the fabric tunnel and escape. Once the elastic comes out the other end, pin both of the elastic ends together and sew them together. You can use your sewing machine to do this, but mine doesn't like elastic and is always trying to eat it, so I prefer sewing it by hand. Before sewing, make sure the elastic isn't twisted, because there's nothing worse than having twisted elastic, and it's a real pain if you want to fix it later on, so yeah, just make sure it's not twisted before you sew it down. Lastly, fold one of the raw edges of the scrunchie inwards, then overlap the folded edge onto the other raw edge and sew this down using a top stitch on your machine. You can sew this by hand if you want a more invisible seam, but I'm too lazy for that, and I find top stitching isn't too noticeable in the end anyway. And there's the first scrunchie complete. It's great for any statement hairstyle, and it's also so big it's really hard to lose within all the junk in your purse because you haven't cleaned it in like 5 years and you're not going to anytime soon, like normal hair ties. Now we're going to make my favourite one, the classic bunny ear scrunchie, or like tie-up scrunchie. For this one, you're first going to want to cut one strip of fabric that's 56 centimeters or 22 inches by 10 centimeters or 4 inches for the body of the scrunchie, and another strip of fabric that's 23 centimeters or 9 inches by 11 centimeters or 4.5 inches for the tie detail. Fold the largest strip of fabric in half long ways and sew it right sides together. Then flip this tube right sides out using a safety pin. Insert a piece of elastic that's 18 centimeters or 7 inches long using the safety pin method we used before. Then once the elastic comes out the other end, sew the elastic ends together. Fold one of the raw edges of the scrunchie inwards and overlap it over the other end so all the raw edges are concealed, then sew the seam closed using your sewing machine. Now if you want a normal basic scrunchie, you can stop here, but adding the tie is a super cute detail and it's really easy to do, so let's keep going. So now you want to get your smaller bit of fabric and fold it in quarters, then cut a curved shape into one of the ends like this. It's not a big deal on how you cut it, so don't stress too much about it being perfect, just make sure it's got some sort of curve. It should look something like this once you've cut it out, a kind of round diamond kind of shape. Fold this diamond in half long ways and sew it right sides together. Make sure to leave a little section of the middle unsewn so we can turn it right sides out later. I left about 1 centimeter unsewn, but it doesn't really matter as long as it's big enough for it to turn inside out. Use a small seam allowance and make sure you're following the curved seam you cut out while you're sewing. Then turn it right sides out using the hole we left open earlier. This is a little bit fiddly, so just take your time, and if the hole you left is too small, you can always seam rip it open a little bit more if you need that extra bit of wiggle room. You can also use something pointed like a pencil or some scissors to push the corners out and make sure they're nice and crisp. Then fold the raw edges of the diamond inwards to match up with the seam allowance and hand sew this hole closed using an invisible stitch. I think it's called like a whip stitch or a mattress stitch. I don't know, just like alternate which side you put your needle into and make very small stitches so they're not noticeable. Lastly, tie the bunny ears onto the scrunchie and you're done. This one is super cute and it's great for making to sell or give as a gift. Now we're on to the lace insert scrunchie. First up, you want to cut a strip of fabric that's 40 centimeters or 16 inches by 6 centimeters or 2.5 inches. Then cut 2 pieces of lace that are 40 centimeters or 16 inches long. The width of the lace or ribbon you pick doesn't really matter, just keep in mind that the wider it is, the bigger the scrunchie will be in the end, and the thinner it is, the smaller the scrunchie will be in the end. Mine was about 8 centimeters wide for reference. Place one strip of lace onto the long edge of the fabric and sew them right sides together using a straight stitch. Then fold the lace outwards like so and repeat for the other strip of lace, sewing it to the other side of the fabric, right sides together. Then iron both pieces of lace outwards and flat. Make sure the seam allowance is folded inwards towards the fabric panel like this. Top stitch over the fabric so the raw edges are laying flat and inwards towards the center panel. This sounds a lot more complicated than it actually is, so you can totally do it, trust me. But yeah, just sew the edges of the fabric so the seam allowance is trapped towards the center. Do this for both sides so all the seam allowance is pointing inwards towards the fabric. Now fold this fabric ribbon concoction right sides together so the short ends are kissing and sew down this edge. Make sure the lace and the fabric ends line up with each other so it looks nice and even. Then fold the strip in half wrong sides together and top stitch on the top of the fabric part to form a casing. Make sure the casing is large enough to fit your elastic. Speaking of elastic, make sure you leave a small section unsewn so we can insert the elastic later on. Find the unsewn bit and insert the elastic using a safety pin. Then once the elastic comes out the other end, sew the elastic ends together. And lastly, close the hole in the scrunchie by sewing it down with a top stitch. And you're finished! I love this one because it adds a bit of pizzazz to an otherwise boring hairstyle, and this one is super good for using up leftover lace or ribbon scraps, or you can even play around with using different colours of fabric instead of the lace for a different look. Cut one strip of fabric that's 100 centimeters or 29 inches by 17 centimeters or 6.5 inches. Then iron one of the ends inwards and one of the ends outwards. Then fold them together so the raw edges are hidden on both sides. I think this is called a welt seam. I don't know, the seam that they use on like jeans sometimes. Anyway, then sew down either side of the seam. So sew down one end, then turn it over, and then sew down the other end of the seam. And it should look something like this. My stitches are kind of wonky because it's hard to sew and film at the same time, so I'm sure yours will look a lot better. Then hem the top and the bottom of this tube by folding the raw edges in twice and top stitching them down. You can measure how much you fold in the edge if you want to, but I find eyeballing it is pretty accurate, and if it's a bit wonky you won't really notice because it will be all scrunched up in your hair anyway. But yeah, just fold the raw ends of either side inwards and top stitch them down. Then fold the loop of fabric in half like this so it forms a little ring, and top stitch near the middle of the hole so it's big enough to insert your elastic. Make sure to leave the section unsewn so we can insert the elastic later on. Insert the elastic using a safety pin and sew the ends together. And then sew the hole in the scrunchie closed with a top stitch, and you're done! I hope you guys enjoyed this video and making scrunchies with me. Let me know what one your favourite was, and if there's anything specific you want me to make a video on next. And subscribe so you can see this ugly mug again, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye!